It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the two films of Memorial Day weekend 2006, May 26th to be exact. And two notable movies. One of the big ones, of course, is X-Men: The Last Stand, and we also have one. I almost forgot what the other one was. The Al Gore documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. But before we get to that one, of course, let's talk about the biggest new release of the weekend, which is X-Men: The Last Stand. Let's have a little history lesson here, shall we? After two very successful movies, the X-Men franchise seemed to be heading in the right direction, and then this movie came along. The trouble began when Bryan Singer didn't come back to helm it because he was working on the Superman franchise, and Superman Returns. More on that in a month or so. Which, I will tell you this right now, it's still my favorite. It's still my favorite of the modern Superman movies. Yeah, Henry Cavill, I'm sorry, man. Like, I tried to give you a chance, but I'm sorry. That Superman Returns is still better than Man of Steel, but that's for another time. But he had not even defined the storyline for the third film in general, so they were basically starting from scratch. Matthew Vaughn, who was initially hired to become the new director, and he left for personal and professional issues, and of course he went on to become a director of several comic book movies with the Kick-Ass films, and then he was replaced by Brett Ratner. It was a big hit financially, but as far as the film goes, yeah, this is not a very good film. And consider this the first of three failed attempts to try to retell the Dark Phoenix saga, because they've had three movies to try to make the Dark Phoenix saga work. They had this movie, they had X-Men Apocalypse, and then they had Dark Phoenix. And they failed on all three occasions. How they did that was amazing, but apparently this was a story that was just way too hard to get right. And this is, of course, based off the Dark Phoenix saga, and also Gifted, which was co-written by Joss Whedon. And it has a plot that revolves around a mutant cure that causes severe repercussions among mutants and humans, and on the mysterious resurrection of Jean Grey, who died in the last movie, played by Famke Janssen. When Bryan Singer directed the first two X-Men movies, you could tell he understood the material, was able to make a good first movie and a great sequel out of that story. When Brett Ratner took over, you could tell that he never understood the material and made a film that was very mediocre and was just made to make a quick buck. It's not that the movie is terrible, but goddamn, there's so many things wrong with this movie that make it so unwatchable. Let's start with those. First off, the movie doesn't take advantage of the comic book stories that they are adapting. It's like they only read little bits and pieces of both stories and just went with the stuff they read instead of reading the whole thing, which you can't really do that at all because you get a movie that is so clustered in such a mess like this movie is. Second, way too many characters die in this movie and are left behind for no reason whatsoever. I swear to God, there were so many characters being killed off for no reason, and you need a purpose for all these characters to die. You can't just go ahead and start killing off characters for the sake of killing off characters. And you don't just kill them off because of, dramatic effects. There's a scene where Mystique is shot with this cure gun, and she turns back into a normal human, and Magneto's just like, oh, sucks to be you, and that's halfway through the movie, never mentioned again. Like, the third act is where you're supposed to have this big, epic finale of everything that's been building up in the past three films, and it just goes on for way too long. I swear to God. This is one of the longest third acts I have ever seen for a movie in my life. It's almost an hour long, and by the time we get to the middle of it, it just gets so boring because nothing different is happening at any point. Like, the moment when I realized that this movie was completely over and done with, there's a scene where Wolverine's trying to stop Jean Grey, and every time he gets closer, his clothes start to rip apart and showing off Wolverine's abs for sex appeal, and at that point, I was just like, okay, I'm done with this movie, Everything I like about this movie quickly went away because of that cheap ploy to show Hugh Jackman's abs. Here's an example. We just had Deadpool and Wolverine come out earlier this year. That movie did the same thing by having a scene where Hugh Jackman's abs are being shown. That was done for comedic effect, and it plays into the part of the storyline. There was a purpose for that to happen, because the power between Deadpool and the Wolverine was so strong that, yeah, of course Hugh Jackman had to show off his abs in that. This is just exploitive. Like, this is just an exploitive, cheap ploy for sex appeal. And you can tell that this was Brett Ratner's work, because somebody like Bryan Singer would probably never do this. I would like to think he wouldn't do that, and yeah, it just doesn't work at all. And of course, gotta have your terrible lines, and no line in the history of the X-Men series If you thought let me just say this: if you thought the line from Halle Berry in the first movie about what happens to her, what happens to her toe when it's struck by lightning, the same thing that happens to everything else, you know how that was bad. Behold the line that is surprisingly even worse.
Don't you know who I am? I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
There are so many things wrong with that one line of dialogue that would take me far too long to explain. First of all, it's a terrible line. Secondly, the acting on Vinnie Jones when he says it is shit. Third, they built this scene up where it just felt like Vinnie Jones was just there to say that line. Like, he wasn't there to be Juggernaut or anything. He just took that part because he knew that line was in there. He knew he had the way to say it. And it's just an unnecessary moment that was yet another excuse to be edgy and cool, and it just fails miserably. And it's just such a terrible, terrible scene in general. Like, at least with the line from X-Men, you can understand where they were coming from. The scene there made sense for Halle Berry to say, what happens to her toe when it's struck by lightning, because there's literally the toad right there, and it's supposed to be the toad getting taken out. There was a reason for that to exist. This is inexcusable. This is just a lazy, cheap attempt to be edgy and cool and create a viral moment, because this was back in the late 2000s and everyone was trying to be like, hey, we have this thing called YouTube now. Let's create a viral moment. And yeah, it just hurts me when I think about these things that happen in the movie that makes me hate this movie so much. So with all that against the movie, was there anything good about the film? And I will say, yeah. I give the cast its credit for working with a terrible script. I thought everybody did a pretty good job. Hugh Jackman's still going to be badass as Wolverine. Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen are great as Magneto, Professor X and Magneto. James Marsden's going to be good as Cyclops, even though he's cut from the movie pretty quickly. The overall best character in the movie, and you see it in that trailer, is Kelsey Grammer as the Beast. And I mean, it was such perfect casting right there. He captures the character of the Beast from the comics as well as from the cartoon. They did an incredible job with the makeup with that character, and he just captures who that character is and plays it to a T. But then again, it's Kelsey Grammer. Kelsey Grammer can usually never do any wrong when it comes to his acting. But like, the action scenes can be really good too. The first half of the third act is pretty cool. The bridge, going right to the island where the person is they're looking for, that's a cool scene. But again, it's not until the middle where it goes on way too long. Plus that stupid cheap ploy for sex appeal is where it goes down badly. X-Men The Last Stand had a potential to end the series on a high note, but Brett Ratner didn't bother to do the research, and it made for a lazy summer popcorn movie with stupid dialogue, unnecessary death scenes, piss-poor attempts at sex appeal, and deciding to do no justice to the X-Men films, and just made a bad threequel just to get a paycheck. And unfortunately, it began a streak of less than spectacular threequels for Marvel, which kind of leads into the next threequel we'll take a look at that starts off next summer. But all a good time on that one. But in the meantime, though, X-Men The Last Stand, it's not a bad movie, but just a very, very disappointing ending to what was supposed to be the final chapter of a pretty strong trilogy of movies, and then just kind of falls apart after with this film. And it's a shame, because the pieces were there for something good, and it just didn't work in the end. So yeah, that's a hard skip on X-Men The Last Stand. Not even a hard skip, just don't expect anything on the same level as the first two movies. But yeah, it's just a mixed bag of a movie. It shouldn't even have said a hard skip. It's just not a very good film in the long run. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at that other movie, the more notable movie that came out this weekend, and it's Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth. It's funny because he was the president of the United States for about an hour, and then CNN said, oh, we've made a mistake, and then it led to a month of waiting to find out who was going to be the next president, and it was George Bush. That's a whole other thing altogether. But how appropriate that I get to talk about this movie just 2 days before we have a real election going on, but I digress. This is An Inconvenient Truth, which is the former Vice President of the United States, Al Gore's campaign to educate people about global warming. And the idea is to document Gore's efforts coming from producer Lori David, who saw his presentation of the town hall meeting on global warming, which coincides with the opening of another movie that came out 2 years prior to this, The Day After Tomorrow. And she was inspired by a slideshow that they met with Davis Guggenheim to adapt the presentation into a film. And thus we have this documentary that became known for raising public awareness on global warming and re-energizing the environmental movement. And the film did very well. It was a massive hit when it came out. It was an unexpected hit. And like I said, it did go on to win an Oscar for Best Documentary. And, you know, Gore himself has actually had time since then to make fun of nobody really gives Al Gore a lot more respect for having a really good sense of humor because, you know, not only because of the way he lost the election, but the fact that he goes on shows like The Simpsons and Futurama, and especially Futurama, and is more than willing to completely make fun of himself in general. Like I love how in the Futurama movie, the first one they did, Bender's Big Score, he shows up a couple times, and there's a part where, he's a taxi cab driver, and Bender from the future has to go back to the past, where Bender has to go and kill Fry, who somehow made it back to the past, and he has this great line in that movie where he's just where Bender offers him $100, and he's like a taxi driver, and then at the end of the scene, Al Gore's just like, damn, that $100 could have bought me 1 gallon of gas, which was funny in 2007, and in 2023 it's not so much, or 2024. But then again, if you actually do the research, gas prices are actually down in most places, but it just depends on which time of the year it is when you really think about it. But also in that movie, there's also a great bit where he's actually fighting in the climax, and Al Gore's just like, finally, I could save the Earth without stupid slideshows. And just like I love that he has a sense of humor. I like the fact that he is willing to make fun of himself at numerous occasions. And again, it also could help that his daughter actually supposedly works on the show, and I think that also plays a large part in it too. But, you know, like I said, man, more power to Al Gore, man, for being able to make fun of himself when he needs to. But you watch this movie, and it's just like the guy can make these conversations very, very interesting and make these important issues very, very much something that you need to pay attention to. And, you know, it had helped too. I think a lot of people really saw these movies and just basically had to look at see what was really going on out there, and it did help in the long run, even though we still are dealing with very much with global warming even today. Like, it's a movie that it feels like it could be made for a specific audience in general. It could be really seen as something that's just very, very, very much a boring thing. But somebody like Al Gore, as charismatic he could be, like, he can make this kind of stuff seem very interesting and very kind of entertaining to watch. And for that, you got to give him a lot of credit for it. I know it's not going to appeal to a lot of people in general. I mean, I watched it and I was thinking, okay, more than likely I'm not going to get a whole lot out of it. But I was kind of surprised at how much I really enjoyed it. I thought it was an appealing documentary. It is kind of an enjoyable watch in general. I think it's one that's definitely worth checking out if you haven't seen it. If you go into it trying to figure out if you should really take global warming seriously, I think it does give you an opportunity to look at this and say that maybe this is something that I should really keep an eye out for. And, like, it's a very intriguing little documentary. I got to give it credit for that. So, that's an inconvenient truth for you. And so with that said, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies. And the next time we meet, we'll take a look at basically one new release, because there's only one big new release to start the month of June off, and that is Vince Vaughn and Jennifer Aniston in the romantic comedy The Breakup, which has sort of a similar history to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, except not quite as much of a success or quite as big of a story as Mr. and Mrs. Smith was. But it does tie into how this movie got made in general. But we'll talk more about that. We'll delve more into that on the next episode. That'll be coming up tomorrow. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, please hit the playlist on the next page, check out the previous episode. Also, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and notification button, because we post videos here every day, and this way you get updates on when new videos come out. Now, with all that said, I am off. I will see you guys next time, and until then, as always, take care.